We have breaking news here. Less than 2 hours ago, President Trump put out on Truth Social a post that is just rocking the international world right now, and especially all the participants in the Russia-Ukraine war and all those who were watching and who were trying to find out if what kind of negotiated settlement Trump's going to do, where he's going to go, and then especially coming just hours after his UN General Assembly speech where he's talked about the subject and then just dropped this bombshell that I guess you can call it a 180, but it's more like going out on a different planet, almost like an alternative universe, stuff that he has not even hinted at before. Now he reverses course in a way that I think I have a bit of a twitch in my neck from the double clutch that I had to do when I looked at this post here, because Trump now has gone way beyond what Joe Biden ever thought. Now let's get right into it. And then I've got some context to put for you here, but let's get right into this. I mean, there's a number of things he said, Gary, if you can roll it right to the top. He says, after getting to know and fully understanding the Russia-Ukraine military and economic situation, and after seeing the economic trouble it is causing in Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. Meaning back to the 1991 borders, meaning before the Maidan, before the Crimea was annexed by Russia in 2014, all of that. That is absolutely astounding. And number one, I mean, let's just take it right off the top there. He says, roll back, Gary, back to the top of that if you could. He says, after getting to know and fully understanding the economics of the Ukraine, Russia, and military and economic situation. No, he does not. He is miles away from tangentially understanding, from casually understanding. And yet he thinks now that he has this deep knowledge, fully understanding the Russian situation. If you fully understand, then you would know how this started basically in 2007, and even really backing up all to that to 1995 when Bill Clinton started to expand NATO. And how that rolled into finally in the Munich Security Conference in 2007, where President Putin at that time, for the first time addressing the Western countries in Munich, said that this is a major, major issue. Advancing NATO, continuing to move it closer to Russia, is not a good proposition and something we consider an existential threat. The next year, when NATO said, yeah, whatever you said, and then they declared openly and directly that Ukraine and Georgia would eventually be accessed into the NATO alliance. And then Russia said, no, that's a red line. And then they used limited amount of force. Ironically, when Georgia, I guess thinking that they had NATO in their back pocket, took some provocative action against Russian peacekeepers, Putin exploited that to the maximum, sent some troops into a couple of the regions of Georgia, but then stopped there to basically say, you're not getting in NATO. He didn't take over the whole place. He just said, this is where we're going and no further, so that it effectively takes NATO off the table for for Georgia, and then continued to say it's a no-go for Ukraine as well. And of course, we all know what happened in the years after that, leading up into the Maidan situation. And then in, I think it was 2014 is when Russia then annexed Crimea, because the Ukraine side, the Ukraine military, went to war in its own country against the ethnic Russians in the eastern part of it. And then to protect them, Russia gave them lots of military and financial support to the rebels, many of them whom had been in the Ukraine military, defected over to the Ukraine side. And then, of course, Russia said, hey, there is no way we're going to allow this to happen. And now you're moving military in our direction. We will annex Crimea, because that's where our Black Sea Fleet is posted in Sevastopol. And then, that led to the Minsk Accords, which were never adopted. And then it led to the March of 2021, when Zelensky said that he will retake all the temporarily occupied territories, primarily Crimea. And then that led to the Russia's reaction to that. Whether you agree with it or not, that's what did lead to their reaction. And they said, no, we're going to take military technical means. If you won't take NATO off the table, we expressly wouldn't. And then that led to war. So unless you understand all of that, and then everything that happened since that time, you don't fully understand the situation. And if you did, you would understand first and foremost that this is an existential fight for Russia. This is something that has its roots going back to the 1990s. It was much stronger in 2008. And then even stronger than that in 2015 and 2022, where they showed that they will even go to combat to prevent NATO from coming up to its border. That's how important this is to them. So thinking that there's some economic pressure points, or that if it's unpleasant enough, or the president gets some kind of lower approval ratings or something like that, that's going to cause Russia to do something different, then you know nothing about what's going on here. So not only do you not know everything, you know none of the things that are important. And then yet, without this knowledge, then he says, I think that Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. I mean, that's an even greater level of lack of understanding. What do you mean now that they're in a position to fight and win? With what army? I mean, again, all you have to do is just look at the wreckage from February 2022 up till today, and that includes the absolutely disastrous attempt at offensive operation to take back territory from Russia, to force them out of the country in 2023, when they were still on their back foot, and they were wobbly from the losses that they absorbed in the first part of this war. And yet you broke your teeth on the first line. And ever since that time, Russia has been in the offensive, and they've been driving, and the Ukraine side has been dying in increasingly large numbers, while the Russians have been dying in increasingly smaller numbers. And again, I've just showed you in recent days how the evidence is showing very clearly. General Sievierk said we're anywhere from a 3 to a 6 time disadvantage along the lines of the front, where the Russian sides, because they're losing less men now, they're gaining more through recruitment, continued, still at a minimum apparently of about 31,000 a month, which is more than they're losing. And so they are growing larger. The industrial capacity, I hesitate to keep saying these things over and over, but you get the point. Every measurable thing shows that Russia is increasing in power and that Ukraine is diminishing, especially in the manpower pool. Ukraine doesn't have it. Russia has so many. According to the Institute for the Study of War, which is rabidly pro-Ukraine and loves to characterize everything as bad as possible for the Russian side, even they, this week, recognized that Russia has so many men that is building up a new strategic reserve of somewhere just south of 300,000. That, by the way, is more than the entire Ukraine army in the area of the forward lines. It's probably around 250, something like that. So that's just a reserve. That's on top of the somewhere around 600 to 700,000 Russian soldiers on the forward lines. So every way you want to look at this, there is a growing chance that the Ukraine side loses the war. Not even gets into a stalemate, but loses the war. The fundamentals are all there for anyone to see. And yet here's the president of the United States saying, now is the time to fight to the 1991 borders. It just belies any kind of logic, any kind of evidence at all, much less something that you understand more. Then he goes on to say that because Russia didn't win, they've been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years in a war that a real power would have won in less than a week. That's what he says. A real military power would have won in less than a week. And as it turns out, Russia is just a paper tiger. That's the takeaway that he gets from all of this stuff. Never talked like this before. This is coming out of literally nowhere. Although it's not actually coming out of nowhere. It's coming out of nowhere out of his mouth. But as we're going to see in here in a minute, we're going to kind of do a bit of a backup to say, where did this come from? I think you'll see in a minute. But this is, remember, we famously talk about here, Colonel McGregor, who for a time worked for President Trump in the first administration. He said, many people have said, Trump is influenced by whoever the last person to spoke with him was. We're going to see who that was, and that'll give us a little bit of insight here. But let's take a look at this issue here about, is Russia a paper tiger? Should they have won in a week if they had been a real military? No. No, they should not. That what they, and I will again repeat this for anybody who may be new to our channel. Russia made it's just catastrophic strategic errors. In fact, they had, for the first 9 months of this, they made a number of major strategic, operational, and tactical blunders. I mean, they performed terribly, far beneath what they should have performed. But that was always mistakes that, because Russia being historically what it is and being as big as it is and having the inputs and the resources that it does, it was always going to be able to overcome those. Historically, they've often started terrible at the front. Just look at World War II, for crying out loud, where they lost millions of people and were literally driven halfway across the country of Russia through thousands of kilometers and suffering massive casualties, losing lots of armored vehicles and everything else, but they were able to absorb it, and then they turned back and won. The same thing happened when Napoleon went and burned Moscow. They traded time for space, and then they always came back. So there's every reason historically to think that was going to happen here, and it has. That's exactly what is going on here. And if you understand anything about history and about the Russian psyche and about the Russian examples in military performance, you would be able to understand that's where this was going to be heading. So there should have been no expectation that things were going to turn around. And I'm talking about in like late 2022, which is what Zelensky thought, because he had successes in Kharkiv and in the Kherson provinces, and he didn't listen to General Mark Milley, who I don't have a very high opinion of, but I was right with him on this one when he warned this is your best shot for negotiated settlement. But his eyes got really big because of the successes, and he thought, we'll just keep doing it and Russia will roll over. But backing up to Russia's entry into this, they thought their plan A was, we're going to roll a bunch of troops into Ukraine, just like they did in, I think it was 1956, into Hungary. They just had a bunch of tanks roll in there. They did not have a field army that was ready to go. They certainly weren't ready to sustain, because they didn't think Ukraine would fight. They thought that it would scare Zelensky, that they probably vastly underestimated. Then they thought he's just this, this comic, a comedian, an actor, whatever, and faced with the specter of Russian tanks rolling into the country and airplanes flying over and guys getting dropped out of helicopters, that it would terrify me and he would just capitulate. That is, by the way, what Zelensky should have done. And had he done that, then the vast majority of his country would have been survived, and the people, possibly hundreds of thousands of them, would be alive today. That will be determined later about how big of a mistake that was. But nevertheless, Russia only had resource for a plan A. And when plan A didn't happen, then it took them a year and a half to get to plan B, which is to be able to sustain conflict. So what Russia did is they sent in a very small force. Less than 100,000 actually went into the Ukraine, I think, in the first month. There was somewhere around 175, 200,000 total allocated for that, but only about half of that was actually used in the initial phases. You would have had 5-6 times more of that number if you were actually invading to conquer. If you had entered it with the conquer, then that's what you would have done. But instead, they went in with this small force that was designed to compel and to scare the other side. So that was a mistake that they made. But don't confuse their strategic error with being a capacity issue. That, like, they sent in a big force that should have been able to win in a week, and then they didn't. Because the only people that say that are people who had love to hate Russia, not people who were given an honest evaluation and an assessment of what actually happened on the ground. So now then, Russia learned its lesson. To spend them a year and a half to try and retool, to start reforming, retraining for the people, getting guys ready, getting rotations ready, etc., building up a force that's big enough to be able to get guys rotated off the front, to get them training before they go in, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, most importantly, the defense industrial capacity to sustain conflict in all of the key areas, whether you're talking artillery, shells, machine gun bullets, especially drones, missiles, long range fires, all of that. And the air power as well. All of that now is cranking at industrial speed. Meanwhile, the Ukraine side is not, and they keep having these massive, huge personnel losses, and then they stayed too long in the tactical areas. Whether we're talking Bakhmut, Avdiivka, so many others. All the absurd incursions into Kursk last year, or the attempt to cross the Dnieper River at Krinky before. All massive wastes of human capital. You talk about errors that the Russians made. Those are some of the massive errors that these on the both operational and strategic that the Ukraine side continues to make, because it never helped them. It just cost them more troops that they can't replace. And in all of that, President Trump has declared Russia is a paper tiger. No, they're not a paper tiger. And then he moves on to say that I guess what's given him the confidence, he claims, is that Russia has long gas lines and that they're in great economic trouble. Meanwhile, Ukraine is getting better. I have no earthly idea upon what he's basing that, though I do have a suspicion. I guess I have an idea. We'll get to that in a minute. And that Ukraine is now able to take back all of its territory back to 1991 and maybe even more. So he's suggesting just because he suddenly thinks it's a great idea, maybe Ukraine can even take part of Russia, and that Russia is just going to lose. And in all of this, he says that now is the time to act. They're toward the end. He says Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any event, I wish both countries well, which that just gets into the weird. But let's camp on that first phrase right there. Putin and Russia are in big economic trouble, and this is the time for Ukraine to act. I just have to ask, what in the hell are you talking about that this is the time? I mean, this just exposes that the president of the United States has no earthly idea how wars are waged, how the military functions. You can't go from a time when you've been being pushed back everywhere. And by the way, I haven't had a chance to get into the tactical update. I'll do that tomorrow. But in the area around Kupiansk, there has been continued significant Russian advances here in just the last 36 or so hours. In the Lyman area, there has been, over the last several weeks, substantial Russian penetrations forward there. The Ukraine side can't stop them. Many of the reasons why they stopped the Russians in their advance in August in the Pokrovsk area is because they took some of the resources out of the Lyman area to move them over here. And then now Russia took advantage of that, and now they're pressing closer into Lyman. And then you have Sievierk and Kramatorsk and that whole area in the Donbass area. Now that's at increasing risk. You don't have enough troops. Sersky has told you they don't have enough troops to hold the line. They don't even have any more real operational or strategic reserves because they only can move pieces around. They don't have anything else to plug gaps. And in this environment, do you want to say now is the time to go on the offense? And then you say, NATO is going to figure this out? NATO is going to be able to do it? NATO is talking about, I think I showed you just a couple of days ago, only thing they've offered so far in the last number of months and for the rest of this year is $2.3 billion. Zelensky said just a few days ago, I need $120 billion just to keep the state flowing while we still get military aid. And they needed another $60 billion. He said, I think I can get half of it, but I need another $60 billion. So far, up to this point, Europe had said, how about 2.3? Well, that means they don't have enough even to sustain the state. And that doesn't even talk about the manpower issue, which is already on a dearth. So everything is going bad for the Ukraine side. They're losing territory at greater and more rapid areas now. Their manpower losses continue to skyrocket while the Russian losses are decreasing because of how they're conducting their operations. They are literally grinding the Ukraine army to dust. And in that environment, you have the president of the United States saying, hey, now's the time. Go back to the 1991 borders. My friend, that is beyond theoretical. That is beyond fantasy. That wouldn't even be a good script for a movie because people would say that is so far divorced from reality, it's not even plausible. That's if you're talking about a movie. But when you're talking about real life, and what does anybody think is gonna result from this conversation here? Does NATO suddenly now magically have tens of thousands of armored vehicles and millions of shells they didn't have before? There's a reason why they hadn't given them up to this point. Not because they didn't want to, it's because they don't have them. Maybe they don't want to as well, but they don't have them. And Trump's statement here that's like, now NATO's going to do what it's going to do. We're going to give more of our stuff. Well, we've already maxed that out, folks. It's already on the books. They're already talking about the first tranche, $1 billion basically per month is about all we can do. And I've told you already, even that pace, which is 1/6 of the last thing Biden did in his last year in office in 2024, 1/6. We don't even have that now. And that's going to have to come slow. And that will only mean that our resources will continue to dwindle. Our stockpiles will dwindle because we can't make $1 billion worth of stuff per month to give to Ukraine, which means we're not even attempting to rebuild our already losses. And this, by the way, I don't know how this is going to work together, but this is on top of the $6 billion package that Trump is trying to get approved to send to Israel. It's like he thinks that resources don't exist. It's like just write on a piece of paper. Yeah, I'll take 600 missiles of this one. I'll take 400 of that one. Cool. And that's it. Like that, all you got to do is write it on a piece of paper and it becomes reality. There's no reality in this. And, you know, I mentioned at the beginning, I think I do have some idea where this happened. So let me just give you a bit of a running start of how we got here. How did we got to this piece here? And this might give you an idea of where Trump's mentality is coming from. So earlier today, the United Nations General Assembly, President Trump made the America's normal speech. And in it, of course, he covered a whole range of things, one of which was the Russia-Ukraine war. And in this, he talked about what he might do on the economic sphere in terms of oil for China and Russia and Ukraine.
China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy and Russian energy products. They're funding the war against themselves. Who the hell ever heard of that one? In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs, which would stop the bloodshed, I believe, very quickly. But for those tariffs to be effective, European nations, all of you are gathered here right now, would have to join us in adopting the exact same measures.
So now, if you saw our show earlier today, you saw that I said, listen, this would be so onerous for Europe to just suddenly stop buying oil and gas. By the way, Ursula von der Leyen since that time has said, yeah, we got a plan to do that in 2027. So maybe a couple of years from now. But Trump said, no, like right now, just bam, just cold turkey, just stop doing that. And then put economic sanctions on China and India and potentially Brazil as well, which is going to hurt all of their economy. So it's a double shot to their economy. So you're going to lose cheap energy imports. A bunch of Europeans are. So that's going to cause some real hardship there in their economic output right now, because now then all their energy, if they can find it at higher rates, will cost more to build everything that they have. Then you're asking them to make less because you're going to have tariffs on the goods that they normally get. And then at the same time, you're also asking them to increase defense spending from most of them, or a great many of them, below 2% up to 5%. So you're asking them to spend, and get less. They can't do it. So even this morning, I said, okay, it's plausible that Trump's saying this because he knows they're not going to do it. So then he doesn't have to do it. And he didn't have to go in and try to undo. He's trying to make good with Modi from India. So then it's like he didn't have to worry about that. Then they can worry about just the tariff that they do have, which is its own mess. And then he didn't have to jack with China as well, because he knows that that's a double-edged sword for sure for us. But then after that meeting, he's going to go and have another meeting. Now, he's going to meet with Zelensky. I think this was already on the schedule. Now, before he met with Zelensky, he was talking about one of the other questions that he didn't raise in the UNGA, and that was the issue of, would NATO shoot down Russian jets? We did talk about that, especially with Poland this morning, and you saw that I consider it kind of a comical "you have been warned" statement from Sievierk, the foreign minister from Poland, against Russia, which I think just caused him to go, what is he talking about? That no one takes him seriously. Certainly no one from Russia is going to take that seriously. But so in the question and answer period, one of the reporters asked President Trump, would you help shoot down Russian planes?
Would you back up NATO allies? You said that you thought that they should shoot down the Russian aircraft. Would you back them up? Would the United States help them out in some way?
Depends on the circumstance, but we're very strong toward NATO. NATO has stepped up. When they went from 2% to 5%, That was great unity. Trillions of dollars is being pumped in, and they're paying us for the weapons that we send. But they've proven they're very brave. I mean, look, they're fighting, and this is a war going on 3.5 years, and people thought it would be over quickly because Russia's a big military power, and Ukraine, I tell you, they are good fighters. Got to hand it to them. They have a lot of courage, a lot of guts.
So you can see some of the themes already popping through in his statement right there, that this war should have been over in a week, that Ukraine is really good fighters. They've been really pushing. They're very brave and all that kind of stuff. But then he's also talking about making money because he wants to sell all these weapons. So he's thinking about transactional issues to where, I don't know, himself doesn't personally make it, but I guess if the country makes it, he somehow feels like he's a success. But that, of course, is a defense industrial capacity, not the United States, not the American people. It's a very tiny, selective, elite business people who make money on the war. But somehow that seems good to him. So that's what he's focused on. But it just seemed to went right over his head that you're talking about. Yeah, I might authorize, depends on what happens, Americans to shoot down Russian warplanes. Listen to me. That was the real news there. And it went right over his head, like you're saying, yeah, this is a medium-sized pen. I'd kind of like to have a sharp one. But anyway, over here, no, that's the issue. You even are hinting at shooting down Russian warplanes. That is an act of war. You do that, I don't care what the circumstances are. You are likely going to have us in a shooting war with Russia. Article 5 or no Article 5, if American warplanes shoot down a Russian warplane, we are likely in a state of war. God only knows where it can go. Obviously, the nuclear component is the one that should terrify everybody, and that means everybody on both sides of this equation. We should run from those kinds of things. But instead, you see President Trump thinking like it's no big deal. Maybe we will. Depends on what happens. Like everything is cost-free for us, and it is most definitely not cost-free. Okay, well, apparently shortly after this, then Trump then goes and meets with Zelensky. I'm not completely sure if that meeting was before or after this, but definitely after the UNGA meeting. And that's when Trump comes out of that singing a complete different tune. Now, I've gone through and shown you all the things that are in that Truth Social post there. In the question and answer period after the meeting with Zelensky, one of the Sky News reporters asked Zelensky what he thought about it.
Given this social media post tonight from President Trump in which he talks about the possibility now, for the first time, of winning back all of Ukraine's territory, I mean, is that a game changer for you? Does it include Crimea, and how will it impact the morale of troops on the front line?
I said it from the first second of our today's meeting. I will not share all the details.
But from your perspective, is it a game changer that he now believes, that President Trump now believes,
Trump
Trump
is a game changer by himself?
Oh, Lord. See, I worry that he believes that. Trump is a game changer by himself. It's really dramatic. And for the life of me, you don't want to pin your country's security on him understanding everything and getting behind this. But this just shows you how delusional Zelensky himself is. And I've been saying this for months now, and I've told this to senior administration officials directly early in this administration. Do not negotiate with Zelensky. He has lost the ability to rationally engage in this situation. He cannot be trusted. He cannot come to a rational decision. You can't say, look, here's the inputs. Here's the pros. Here's the cons. Here's the conditions that exist. There's no way to win. There's no way to succeed here. Continuing to fight means we're continuing to die and continuing to lose. We have to go in. He can't reach that conclusion. No matter what, he still wants to continue fighting. He still wants to win, however defined, even though that definition changes over time. But that's the only thing he wants. And so now then, some of the themes that you heard in Trump's Truth Social post are things you hear from Zelensky all the time. Russia's economy is falling apart. The Ukraine side is fighting and doing hard. They're so brave and they're doing great. And we're improving. We're getting better all the time. Russia's getting weaker. They've suffered 1.5 million casualties. They're losing as I guess it was a week ago on Sunday, General Keith Kellogg, Russia's in fact losing. I reiterated that when we showed that on the show here. That's where the Zelensky mentality is. And I think that he is so delusional, he actually believes it. It's not a lie to him. He actually means that. But what that also shows you is that Trump can't distinguish someone who's delusional from something that's accurate. The truth and a delusion, he can't distinguish. So he comes out of that meeting with Zelensky. And you saw Zelensky said, the first thing I said into his mouth, I told him right from the get-go, all those things. And Trump bought it. Trump bought it. And so now he has radically changed everything he said in that one post, even from earlier in the day. Forget about everything else. But I'm not going to let him forget about everything else. He's going to solve this in 24 hours. I know Zelensky. I know President Putin. Remember that. I've shown you that soundbite several times from 2023, May 2023 to be specific. He went into some detail of saying how he's going to get this war over with. I know the factors. He said that before. I know the factors. I know what's going on. I know what it's going to take to get this done. And it won't even be hard. It won't even be hard. That's what he said. And then, of course, one day turned into 100 days, and 100 days turned into, well, a few weeks. And then that turned into, 50 days, and then 10 days. And then that went away. And I think I read somewhere, I didn't get a chance to go through all the details, but apparently he's made a new 1 month deadline for something today. None of it means anything. And what do you think the reaction to this is going to be on the Russian side? I've already seen that the Russian side has reported it, but they haven't shown any an immediate reaction, which they rarely do. The Russians typically don't have this knee-jerk reaction. They usually contemplate things and think about it before they respond at the official level. But I promise you, behind the scenes, it's got a great deal of attention, because what you're telling Ukraine, Russia, let's take with that one first. You're telling Russia that I know that since the time I came into office, we've been talking about all these negotiated settlements, that I wanted to bring this war to an end, that I've sent Sievierk there to find a way to end this several times, that I myself have met with you, invited you to American territory in Alaska. We keep talking about this, finding a way to end it, etc. And now then, all right, forget about everything. Now then, I'm just going to give a green light to Ukraine. They can do whatever they want. We'll give them whatever weapons that we can have. NATO will give stuff. The European Union writ large will give all kinds of stuff, and they can take whatever they want. Good luck to you, to both of you. That's just weird. Okay, and that's not a pejorative. That is an assessment that this is what foreign leaders see, that the president of the United States is unstable, that he cannot be, number one, trusted. Nothing he says is worth the paper it's written on or the tweet it's made from. It can change within the same day, and it can change in radical differences, like what this one is from everything else he has said since he's been in office. And the Russians aren't stupid. They know that there is no path to 1991 borders, that there's no military solution, that even if the NATO side just went insane fully and said, you know what, even though we've been dithering around for 3.5 years, we're going to go ahead and join Ukraine, and we're going to fight Russia at a conventional level. Russia would take the gloves off, and I assure you, I don't know that it could be kept at the conventional level. I think that it's like a 90% probability tactical nuclear weapons would be used, because you're talking about a 32-member NATO alliance, not just one nation plus Ukraine against Russia. They're going to do what they can to equalize the situation, but that's several steps down the road. But Russia knows that you don't have the military wherewithal to do that, and I think Russia rightfully says there's no way, whether Germany, France, UK, Italy, even Poland, that they're going to actually join a war against Russia, especially Poland, because they're so close. They're going to be the first target. They'd be the very first thing Russia would go after. Probably the Baltics right now. You start a war, then you almost guarantee the destruction of the Baltics, all three of them, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, because they're together like maybe one combat brigade with no combat experience. Russia could just eat them up in a matter of 3 or 4 days, and that's not hyperbole. This Russian army could do that, because that NATO force up there is a shell. And then now you can certainly talk about adding air power, and you can start losing a lot of NATO jets, because it's a very narrow band through that Sievierk gap to be able to even get in there to possibly help. But now then you take the gloves off from Russia, and they have no reason to be restrained on anything. You can count on Oreshniks hitting some major locations throughout NATO territory. And you want to start getting into an air war or a missile war, Russia can have that fight. We can't. We don't have the capacity. They have the industrial capacity that's now been cranking, now rolling in towards its 4th year. We're still sputtering down here tiny, just a fraction higher than where we were in 2022. Russia's aware of all this. So what you're telling Russia is, forget about diplomacy. Just win the war by whatever means you need to, and prepare for war with NATO. That's the likely outcome of this. That you're telling Russians you have no partner for peace. We thought we had one in the United States. We knew we didn't have one in Ukraine and Europe. That's what all they've ever been talking about is war. We definitely didn't in Kiev, because they have only talked about conflict and fighting this out to win it. But if you now take America off of that, now then the whole NATO is nothing but an adversary. And Russia has no incentive to do anything but provide for its own national security the best way that it can. And that means securing it on the ground, especially on their flanks. And they're going to prepare for another conflict. And of course, once that kind of stuff starts happening, then that's what NATO, and then you have this self-fulfilling prophecy. That is where a lot of this could go. Now, I don't know where this is going to happen. Trump changes his mind so many times, and who knows that by 10 o'clock tonight, he might have another Truth Social outlet, which contradicts that one. I hope so. But no matter what happens with this has deeply undermined this administration. I don't know if they can recover from this one. This pivot is so hard in a direction that hadn't even been hinted at from this beginning, that it has to call into question the emotional and psychological capacity of the president. I don't say that in any kind of pejorative way or an insulting way, only an assessment. This is not the actions of a rational actor. And for those who love to defend Trump and say, oh, this is just Trump being Trump. No, you even can compare the Trump 45 version with the Trump 47. This is off the reservation even for him. And that's part of the problem of, this, so-called crazy man theory that Trump had embodied before, because you said, well, he was really rational all the time. I actually talked to many people who had conversations with him behind the scene. They said, oh, a lot of this is just for show, but he's a very rational, very reasonable person. He's very thoughtful, thinks a lot of these things through. Maybe that was the case then. I don't think that's the case now. The evidence suggested it's not, because these things don't give an advantage. This stuff today, this Truth Social today, does not give any advantage whatsoever to the Trump administration, to Ukraine, to Europe. Now, it may do something to help those who have lusted for war. You can probably count on the Jack Keanes to be cheering this on. David Petraeus will undoubtedly be cheering on. What's his name? The other 3-star general that we have, not Jack Keane. All these guys that we've had on many times, Ben Hodges, I'm sure they'll be cheering this on. I'll be looking to see what they say tomorrow. Those are the guys who lust for war, who are absurdly naive about the consequences and the results of modern warfare. And somehow they think that it just won't happen. We'll still keep it confined. We'll keep the battlefield in Ukraine. It won't happen to us. And they're just rolling the dice on a game that they know so little about the rules, where there's another player that may take actions that you don't think they should, because you have given them reason to think that they have to take dramatic countermeasures. That's the big risk that we have here. So I hope that in the coming hours or days that Trump walks this one back. He will get my thanks if he does. I won't mock him for that at all. This is something that we need to get fixed here.
Danny, I don't think that'll be happening, actually. We have some new sound here. Here's Trump. It's a little bit hard to hear, so let me just tell you what he does say. He basically says his relationship with Putin ended up not meaning anything. And then he thanks President Macron because of his good advice over the course of time he turned to him. So let's play this.
With Putin, but unfortunately that's relationship didn't mean anything, unfortunately. But when I needed some advice and when I needed some help in terms of a country in that part of the world, you were always there. And you helped me settle some of these 7 wars. I'm very proud of it with Putin, but unfortunately that relationship didn't mean anything, unfortunately. But
wow. Okay. So that message will be received in Moscow. So you're saying that all this stuff, and how many times you say, oh, me and Putin, well, back to 2023. Oh, I know Putin well. We get along great. He said that all throughout this time here. We have a good relationship. I understand him. We understand each other. And now he's just thrown it in the trash. He said, guess it didn't mean anything. You remember how many times I remarked that I thought it was really odd that Trump would say 4 or 5 times his words, I thought we had a deal to end this with Putin. And all of a sudden we didn't. You never had a deal with Putin unless you agreed to his June 2024 terms, unless that was agreed to, because they've never changed. You couldn't possibly have thought you had a negotiated deal because the Russians have been unambiguous and unchanging on what the terms are. And they're not what you've been talking about, which, by the way, I don't even know what your terms were. I don't think that you've ever actually articulated what you wanted other than you wanted the war to end, but you never said where it was. Did you want them to have, a lot of this territory from the Donbass? Did you want it frozen on the current line of contact? Did you think that there had to be some exchanges here? And if so, not just category, because he did make that exchanges, but what? Exchange what for what? What was the plan? What did you think you had an agreement on? See, those are the things that he's never said, only this category here. And so now then you have Putin, who in all probability was always, well, we know he was cordial because Trump himself admitted that, but he probably also said, yes, here is the conditions that we'll agree to, and we won't agree to this. So if we can work this out, then we'll do it. And then Putin himself, Sergei Lavrov, Peskov, all these guys keep talking, Sergei Ryabkov, they always say, Novinzia, Ambassador Polyansky on my show, all said, we desire a negotiated settlement. But if we cannot get it according to the terms that we can live with, then we will attain it on the battlefield by force of arms. They never said anything except that. All of these different speakers all had one story, and the story never changed. And they always said, though, they were grateful that President Trump, especially compared to his predecessor who wouldn't even talk to Russia, at least we have a partner and we can talk about this. The Russians have been in just the last, I think, 24 hours reiterating again, they're looking at nuclear proliferation treaty. They want to go down the path of saying, hey, the START treaty is coming up soon. Let's get this extended for 1 more year and then do some negotiations so that we can continue on, because that benefits mankind, not even just one country over the other. So that's what they're after right here. And now here you have President Trump, along with his comments he just made to Macron, that, yeah, that doesn't mean anything. Just throw it in the trash. Basically, I'm going to do whatever I'm going to want to do because he's not going to do what I want. So, move on. So what you were doing, let's just kind of summarize this. You were presenting the Russian side with a very simple set of options. Either capitulate and do what we want you to do in ways that are beneficial to us from a position of superiority and power, give in on everything that we've asked, even though we can't compel it, or we're just going to walk away and pretend like we're going to fight back and win back to the 1991 borders. So that Russia, their only options are either submission or just let the fundamentals play out the way they're going to and win the war. That's what you're putting Russia in a position. This could be a very dark day in the history of this war. And I fear that if we don't get this corrected really fast and deal with this in a big way, and I hope this is one of those deals like when Biden several times said that he would fight China over Taiwan, and then the administration walked it back afterwards. I really hope we get something like that, because this could be a big problem if we keep on doing it what it is, the way it has been right now. Because like what Gary's highlighting right there, it's just not true. It doesn't matter how much spirit Ukraine has. If you don't have the manpower, if you don't have the ammunition, if you don't have the weapons, you don't have the training, then, and the other side has more to the view than every category, you will lose the war. and Trump's comments aside, reality will still win the day. Spin's not going to do it. Your statements aren't going to do it. Social media posts don't actually have combat power. That's the bottom line. Well, we appreciate you guys today. I know it's a little bit late on a Friday afternoon, but we could not get away. Didn't want to wait for this one tomorrow. This was such important breaking news. Wanted to bring you an analysis as quick as it could. We will definitely keep on top of this. We'll see what kind of reaction eventually comes out officially in Moscow, what other European nations have to say, and what other folks of various importance like the Warluster generals. We'll see what they have to say. As a reminder, we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Tell your friends who prefer to get their information via podcast, especially shows like this, folks. You don't want them to miss this one. This is something you're going to want to have. Or if your other friends who like the written form, send them this, DanielDavisDeepDive.substack.com, where we have all this information. Actually, we have both written and video on the Substack there. You should join that up for sure today, even if you're already on this the YouTube channel here. We appreciate you guys. We are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth you need, especially on days like this. We bring clarity you're probably not going to get on any of the mainstream news media, but you can count on it here. And we'll see you tomorrow on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.